Philip, thank you for the kind invitation. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present this paper. My paper today will be entitled Tracheotomy and Ocular Trauma, Intraocular Foreign Bodies. I have no financial disclosures. So basically, I think metallic foreign bodies should be, the way we manage it is split into three areas, right? Before surgery, if surgery is indicated, intraoperative issues, and of course, very importantly as well for this group of patients, the appropriate post-operative care. When thinking about intraocular foreign bodies in ocular trauma, is to suspect that it's a possibility. Now, of course, in the civilian setting, any kind of work relating to metal and metal contact, example, hammering, grinding incidents or accidents, assault, and the weapon is of course important, whether it's a knife injury, a gunshot injury, or just blunt trauma like this, versus a military type of situation where you have explosions with multiple expected foreign bodies, gunshot wounds, again, knife injuries, less common perhaps, and intraocular foreign bodies in this kind of traumatic situation then can be found in up to about 41% of open globe injuries. Bottom line, whenever there's trauma, suspect that there could be a concomitant intraocular foreign body. We understand, of course, some of the prognostic factors in ocular trauma. These include presenting visual acuity, so any patients with very poor vision, light perception, NPL, the odds of being able to intervene successfully to retain vision may not be very high. When there's concomitant endophthalmitis, again, prognosis can be extremely guarded. Globe rupture, perforating injury, retinal detachment, and the presence of a relative afferent pupillary defect are all relatively poor prognostic factors when we come to ocular trauma. When we look at the special case of intraocular foreign bodies, then the factors which are prognostic include the things like a relative afferent pupillary defect, hyphema, vitreous hemorrhage, the presence of a corneoscleral entrance wound, uveal prolapse, and retinal detachment. In terms of detection, I think it's important to use the appropriate imaging technology wherever available. For CT scans, the best resolution really is to use the helical CT scan where appropriate, using fine cuts, and in the left picture here, you can see the presence of a foreign body without too much of an artifact, in contrast to a more conventional kind of CT scan where you can see some hardening artifacts around the foreign body. X-rays are a good and pretty sensitive means of identifying foreign bodies, but remember, there is a false negative rate of up to 60% when you use an X-ray to try and locate a foreign body in this context. Of course, if there are other modalities such as ultrasound B-scan and ultrasound bar microscopy to look for foreign bodies within or near the sulcus area, but these may be better after the initial repair when there is some globe integrity to minimize pressure on a ruptured globe. The complications of a retained metallic intraocular foreign body are well known. Won't go into too much detail. Suffice to say that with iron, probably the more common material that's found, ferrous material, you get siderosis. One of the useful tests to remember is that the ERG can be lost, and if you have a decreased B wave on the ERG, to suspect that you may be dealing with siderosis. Copper deposits cause chalcosis and more intense inflammation, so less likely to be missed, but still something to think about. And particles which are less immunogenic, such as zinc and aluminum, can cause encapsulation in delayed cases. Now, of course, if you look at the literature, there are reports of cases in whom there are distinct intraocular foreign bodies, some of which are presumed ferrous, who seem to retain good vision despite being 6-7 years downstream. Right, and these two papers from Harper and Constantinos reported in 2008. I think one of the unifying areas of terminology for ocular trauma has been the Birmingham Eye Trauma System, and I think this is now quite widely accepted. And we of course a score with P giving you a very low score to start, and things like rupture and ophthalmitis decreasing that score. That score becomes important because your category 1 is the lowest score with just about 0 to 44 points, and really the chance of remaining light perception is actually up to 74%, as you see over here. In contrast, if you started off with good vision without endophthalmitis, your chance of retaining 20/40 vision can be as high as 94%. So the prognosis is very, very different depending on where you start. For us as surgeons, I think the key to remember, or key consideration is, should we operate? When should we operate? Clearly, if there's endophthalmitis, I think most would agree urgent surgery as expedient as possible is indicated. Is the patient generally fit for surgery? If the patient has had multiple other trauma and is surgically or medically unfit for surgery, you may not be able to perform safe surgery. And of course, before we intervene, we need to be sure that the medical staffing as well as equipment is up to whatever we need. Before we enter into surgery, I think most would feel it prudent to document a careful discussion of the condition and often guarded visual prognosis and the possibility of blindness and phthisis bulbi with such patients before surgery is actually attempted. We would consider antibiotic cover if unable to operate early. So Collier looking at, in fact these were actually wartime patients who had soldiers with intraocular foreign body without endophthalmitis. In their series, when they found that coverage with systemic and topical levofloxacin as well as moxifloxacin resulted in no cases of endophthalmitis seen, even in that kind of wartime scenario, in 79 eyes. So the take-home message from there, if you really have some reason that you cannot operate safely, then perhaps coverage with these antibiotics may be very useful. In considering the issue of delayed removal versus immediate removal, I think for most of us who have access to good facilities, good staffing, and surgically fit patients, most would advocate immediate removal of these metallic foreign bodies to minimize the risk of endophthalmitis, to minimize the risk of ocular inflammation. And of course, there's a possibility of reducing PVR risk and reducing the number of surgical procedures that would be needed eventually. Disadvantages of operating in that kind of hot case would be, of course, a poorer globe integrity. There's a high chance of wound leakage, even with immediate repair, and corneal edema, etc., may require temporary keratoprosthesis, which is not always available. In terms of the extraction options, I think for metallic foreign bodies, at least when it's ferrous, you think of whether it might be a magnetic material. Non-magnetic material would almost always require forceps. You'll see even for the magnetic materials, the magnet actually is an option, but when that fails, then typically forceps removal with pars plana vitrectomy may then be an option. I think it's been quite well established now in several papers that for safest and most controlled removal, many surgeons do prefer vitrectomy. However, the external electromagnet is still an option in some selected cases. So, for example, if you have a vitreous opacity, a medial opacity, and a large foreign body, I think most would bias towards a pars plana vitrectomy with either a magnet or forceps to remove. In contrast, if you had a vitreous IOFB and a well-visualized, not much medial opacity, then the external electromagnet may well be an option. I think most of us would feel that an intraretinal or a subretinal foreign body should be removed with vitrectomy rather than with an external magnet. This is just the same in some detail. Some authors arguing that the external magnet is a suitable option in cases where perhaps you didn't have a lot of surgical equipment and staffing, and some others arguing that the pars plana vitrectomy really would be the way to go because of higher chance of endophthalmitis, PVR, and so-called anatomical loss of phthisis when the external magnet was used. So I think in terms of pars plana vitrectomy in metallic intraocular foreign bodies, we would prefer to perform this surgery if they were associated endophthalmitis, significant mediopathy, encapsulation of the foreign body. It was a large foreign body, it was intraretinal, subretinal, or some associated pathology such as a retinal tear, retinal detachment, and or traumatic cataract. Some tips which may be useful. Most surgeons would feel that a 20-gauge pars plana vitrectomy would be the most versatile means of approaching this problem. A 6 mm infusion may be used if there's a concomitant choroidal hemorrhage and cataract. The main reason for using the 20-gauge vitrectomy really is that it's easy to perform a sclerostomy with an MVR blade without too much pressure on the globe, and this globe, remember, may not be so intact, especially in the context of perforation. Additionally, the enlargement of such a sclerostomy in the pars plana area would allow for fairly easy removal of the intraocular foreign body. 23 and the smaller gauge trocar cannula systems can also be considered if the globe was structurally intact because of the increased pressure usually required to introduce such cannulas. This may not be a good choice for a ruptured globe. Bright light sources such as the current generation of xenon and other sources would be useful, and wide angle viewing systems have now enabled us to do surgery even in cases of macular edema, so long as there's at least a small clear area of the cornea to allow visualization of the posterior segment, and that really has reduced the need for us to call in our corneal colleagues to put in a temporary keratoprosthesis before we proceed. In terms of the intraoperative steps, some of the important steps will include taking samples for gram stains and cultures. If your lab has a facility, getting a stat or immediate gram stain may be useful in terms of whether or not to put intravitreal antibiotics, creation and completion of posterior vitreous detachment, and removal of all vitreous adhesions to either the intraocular foreign body or the capsule that's surrounding the foreign body. In terms of the initial extraction of the foreign body from within the eye, if it's a small foreign body, usually you can use either the intraocular magnet for magnetic metallic foreign bodies, or forceps when it's non-magnetic, and generally we prefer the magnet as it's less traumatic to the surrounding structures. If it's a larger foreign body, however, it's usually more efficiently done with a pair of forceps. In terms of removal of the foreign body itself from the eye, if it's a small foreign body, enlargement of a pars planar sclerotomy in the circumferential plane is useful for removing such a foreign body. A larger one may be better to be removed using either a dedicated scleral tunnel or limbal incision, especially if there's a concomitant cataract extraction is needed. Important to plan the exit site before trying to hold on to the intraocular foreign body either with magnet or forceps. And if using the magnet, oftentimes you may need to actually use a secondary forceps to remove it from the wound, as the whole of the magnet on the foreign body is not that secure. It's either a pretty large wound in order to extract it with the magnet alone, or transferring to a pair of forceps. Let's just look at some videos. And on the left we have the rare earth magnet removal. So this is on the left side now, removing the vitreous around it. In the right you can see when you try to grasp a foreign body with a pair of forceps, it's not always as easy as it looks. And after a few attempts you still get it, and of course you have to hold on tight to it. So in the right side now you can see the removal through the sclerotomy, and this case was actually associated with a retinal break, so retinal laser is being done. Now notice in the left now, the foreign body being transferred to a pair of forceps before removal through a sclerotomy that's been enlarged. And you can just see that on the left. And in the right, you can see after removal of the foreign body, silicone oil has been injected. In terms of concomitant pathology, I think one should always perform a careful 360-degree scleral depression and peripheral retinal examination. Endolaser with NORP cryopaxy together with air or gas tamponade for retinal breaks without retinal detachment will be recommended. Retinal detachments, when present already, should be treated by lasering the breaks with a gas or silicone oil tamponade. And of course, some authors strongly advocate silicone oil because of its longer duration and the high risk of PVR in such cases. When there's pre-existent PVR, especially for the more chronic intraocular foreign bodies, membrane peeling plus minus a retinectomy and silicone oil would be useful. Cataract removal is recommended if significant. I think for us, we prefer no IOL in the initial setting because of the high risk of retinal detachment, PVR, as well as endophthalmitis. Some authors, however, of course, advocate an all-in-one, everything included in one procedure. Post-operative care is important. I think the most critical will be inpatient care where possible, and with daily monitoring for in acute cases for endophthalmitis, that risk is up to about 13%. Retinal detachment and PVR tend to come on some weeks to months later, but that risk is pretty high, and it's about 36 to 46% for each of these problems. So I think in summary, metallic intraocular foreign bodies present a challenge to most practicing ophthalmologists. There are more treatment options available than non-metallic intraocular foreign bodies. However, the risk of endophthalmitis, retinal detachment, proliferative vitreoretinopathy, complications of retained metallic intraocular foreign bodies should be recognized and searched for. Immediate early treatment is recommended wherever facilities permit. Pars planar vitrectomy removal is indicated in pre-existing presenting endophthalmitis, retinal detachment, PVR, medial opacity, and large IOFBs. And remember always that there's a high risk of post-removal risk of endophthalmitis up to 13%, retinal detachment, PVR, and a phthisis rate of about 10%. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your kind attention.